Canadians have served as soldiers in many futile, purposeless wars, like the Boer War of 1897 to 1901, the First World War, and the First Iraq War. The slaughter of Canadians in World War I battlefields like Vimy Ridge, Ypres, Passchendaele, the Somme are so horrific and the casualties so great and enormous, I urge you all to read the many great books about that war. Most of those Canadians died in a small area in eastern France along the German border in muddy, wet fields and trenches. 60 million people, civilians and soldiers, died in Europe in 4 years of futile war. 10 million more people died around the world following the November 11th armistice from a worldwide influenza pandemic that feasted on an exhausted, weakened, and malnutritioned world population. When Canadian soldiers, many like my dad, were only 16 or 17 or 18 years old and died on those horrible battlefields or in hospitals suffering wounds, nurses and soldiers most often heard the words that left their lips upon their last dying breath. Mother, oh mother, I need you, Mom, where are you, Mom? And then they were gone. The staggering loss of life on European battlefields necessitated the Canadian government to invoke what was called conscription, or the draft, in World War I and II, forcing all able-bodied men 18 to 27 into the armed forces and to battles. Yet few Canadians know that fully half of all Alberta and Saskatchewan boys took my dad's advice, and likely their own dad's advice at the time, and ran away and hid when the Northwest Mounted Police showed up at their farmhouse to compel them away to war. Mostly these unwilling men and boys were children of German, Irish, Russian, Ukrainian, Hungarian, French, Canadian, Jehovah's Witness, Doukhobor, and other non-British immigrants. That made up most of the early settlers of the prairie provinces. This rounding up of pacifists and war resistors was the first assignment of what is now the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. Thousands of Canadian conscripts were led up the troop ship gangplanks in Halifax in leg irons and chains to prevent their escape. Camp Borden and other military training camps had high barbed wire fencing around them to deter the thousands who wanted to desert. Conscription riots occurred throughout Quebec in 1917 and 1918 as fully 25% of those drafted refused to go willingly and also had to be taken in chains. When the war was over November 11, 1918, the politicians of the victorious nations deranged the peace afterward, called the Treaty of Versailles, and they carved up Europe, Africa, and the Middle East so grotesquely that it created the circumstances that made World War II, the Israeli-Arab wars, and even African and Middle Eastern civil wars inevitable. In addition to Canada's role in the Boer War, World War I and II, and the Korean War, Canadians have participated in over 130 so-called peacekeeping missions, often futile and ineffective at keeping any peace, for example in Somalia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Cyprus, and Haiti. When I was treating drug addicts of heroin, morphine, and methamphetamine and cocaine at the Iboga Therapy House in 2002, my oldest patient I treated was a 60-year-old veteran of the Canadian Forces who had been addicted to morphine since his time as a peacekeeper in the Congo. This is his story as he told it to me. I grew up without a dad, and I was wild and getting into trouble. I figured I needed some discipline, and I didn't have it, so I joined the Canadian Army at age 18, figuring I could get that father-like structure in my life that was to straighten me out and to give me some proper goals. Well, after 3 months training, my company was sent to join a United Nations mission in the Belgian Congo. There was the beginnings of a violent independence movement occurring, and the UN was there to keep a very tentative truce between the white Europeans, mostly Belgians, and the competing black independence militias and guerrilla groups. So there I am in the Congo, age 18, and all hell breaks out. There's really just a few of us Canadian UN peacekeepers, and the black militias and black Congolese generally start killing and raping the white Europeans, and doing so in horrific ways. The whites started to flee, and the UN soldiers are so outnumbered that we have orders not to fire, even though we're right in the middle of this horrific carnage. Then blacks turn on blacks as well as the whites. One day I was trapped observing a mass killing and saw white and black women disemboweled, pregnant women with their stomachs slashed open while they were alive, and fetuses were being ripped out of their bodies. I heard women being raped savagely day and night for days. Kids, women, men, whites, blacks, macheted to death, tortured, shot, decapitated. It was absolute terror for days on end. The blood-curdling screams of the victims haunt me to this day, and that's 40 years later. Within 3 months of being there, I'm just 19 now. I'm so far gone, I tried to kill myself and I shot myself. I didn't die, though. I lost one kidney and gave myself permanent nerve damage to my back and spine. Ever since, I've been prescribed morphine for my back pain, but I became dependent on the morphine, and it's messed up my life in later years. So now I want a morphine-free life for what few remaining years I have left. That's why I'm here, Mark. I'm hoping you can help me get off this morphine addiction and these terrible things I've been thinking for 40 years. That was 2002. I haven't kept up with what's become of him. His name was Ron. I don't know where he's been since then. Such is the smoothness of propaganda and the dereliction of real remembrance. Everyone wears a symbolic poppy, but few can explain its significance. In the poem for the dead in Flanders Field by John McCrae, he goes, "In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row." It's important to remember that opium poppies were deliberately planted on the graves of the dead by the thousands, the tens of thousands, to highlight the great botanical gift opium was to every soldier. Now our soldiers in Afghanistan, carrying out the politics of prohibition in faraway places, betray the soldier's best friend with a disgraceful campaign of herbicide. So here's to all the boys and men robbed of their lives, whose last cry was for their mother, girlfriend, wives, or other loved ones who died in the uniform of this nation of Canada for the cynical benefit of our government and its deadly politics. Across the street from the Cannabis Culture headquarters is Victory Square, a badly misnamed place for the honored dead of World War I, and there is the phrase on the side of the obelisk there. It says, "Is it nothing to you?" meaning the sacrifice of these men. But ultimately, the sacrifice will continue until we embrace words like Martin Luther King, whom I admire and read for comfort in this jail. And Martin Luther King had this to say, "If we retaliate with hate and bitterness, the new age will be nothing but a duplication of the old age. We must blot out the hate and injustice of the old age with love and justice of the new." This is why I believe so firmly in nonviolence. Violence never solves problems. It only creates new and more complicated ones. If we succumb to the temptation of using violence in our struggle for justice, unborn generations will be the recipients of a long and desperate night of bitterness, and our chief legacy to the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos.